Today I have with me Matt Silver from Forager. Matt's got a really exciting story. His company works in the cross-border markets, so Mexico and Canada, and they have some really exciting news. Just recently raised some money, and we wanted to take the time today to talk a little bit about what you're doing in the industry, kind of the customers, the growth of the company, and just learn a little bit more. So how you doing, Matt? Welcome.
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in order to kick it off, we're all kind of in the midst of COVID-19. So let's go back about a month. So about a month ago, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau closed the U.S. border. I know, in our offices when that first launched, there was a lot of questions, right? So we have a bunch of clients crossing the Mexican border, the Canadian border, kind of all day, every day. And there wasn't a lot of clarity, right? Especially in that first, the first couple of hours after that announcement on what that meant, right? Coming out of that, we've continued to see freight tender volumes drop by about 10% week over week. So that volume in the Canada border is definitely down. But what we were looking to do was just kind of talk through, talk through COVID, talk through how your company's been impacted, what you're doing, and kind of what you've seen at the Canadian border. So I think to start off, if you wouldn't mind, maybe talk a little bit about kind of yourself and the company and what you guys are looking to do.
Sure. So I'm Matt Silver. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Forager. I come from the industry. I was originally at Coyote Logistics for my entire career. Having started the Mexico department there and later focused on Canada as well. And so I left 2 years ago and ultimately we started Forager with a specific mission of simplifying cross-border shipping, specifically for in North America. And so, like you mentioned, it's primarily truckload and it's anything shipping between the US, Mexico, and Canada. As long as it crosses one of those borders, we're happy to help with it. So, yeah, we've definitely seen a dip in volume over the last few weeks since coronavirus happened, or since it really started to impact the U.S. or North America as a whole. Automotive stopped. That stopped a few weeks ago, and we've seen a complete dip in volume with most of our automotive customers. Although we do have one that's been working with the Mexican government to be able to stay open to continue producing certain parts. And then our food customers, on the other hand, our CPG, food and beverage customers. That volume has picked up, which has been nice. Overall, our volume is a little bit down right now, but it's nothing that's going to be a huge impact to the business long term. We'll be fine. But yeah, there's been less volume, and because of the fact that there's less volume, there's more capacity available anywhere, whether this is in the U.S., whether this is U.S., Canada, Mexico, U.S., any of it.
Right.
So less volume means more capacity available, which means that prices are going to go down.
Sure. When you were if we could just step back and to your, put on your Coyote hat real quick. When you were there, what was kind of the business use case, right? You mentioned challenges kind of cross border, but what was kind of the business problem that led you to go out and start a company? And can you kind of talk me through that decision and that process?
Sure. So when it comes to domestic shipping within the U.S. alone, it's pretty simple and straightforward. There's obviously some complexities to the way that you would operate certain types of shipments, but generally speaking, at a 30,000-foot view, shipping in the U.S. is one trucking company that picks up a load in Dallas and delivers in Atlanta, and they deliver 2 days later, and you pay them. When you're shipping something between the U.S. and Mexico specifically, you have at least 3, if not 4, different paid parties involved in a single cross-border shipment, plus 2 customs brokers that you have to coordinate with, plus facilities on either side of the border with 2 different languages at the same time. So it's probably 10 times harder to operate U.S.-Mexico freight than it is domestic. For U.S.-Canada freight, I would put that at like a 3 or a 4 compared to domestic U.S. being a 1 and Mexico-U.S. being a 10. And so at Coyote originally, the way I ended up with Mexico was that I was in a different department. I was in our private fleet department, and I ended up starting to book some Mexico loads with one of the carriers that I was working with. And I didn't want anything to do with it when I booked the loads. I booked them because I got, somebody asked me to offer them to a carrier. And so I booked a few of them. I made more commission on those than I was making on the domestic stuff. And so I started gravitating towards that. And next thing I know, one of the executives at Coyote came up to my desk and said, "Hey, what are you doing booking Mexico freight? You're focused on private fleet." And I said, "Well, I'm making more money doing Mexico than I was with private fleet stuff. And he said, okay, well, your new job is going to be to go figure out how to grow Mexico. So
That's
I went
pretty
and
quick.
sat over there.
Pretty quick pivot from the executive level, right?
Yeah, I think they had talked about it because they had seen the fact that I was putting up those numbers for a little bit. But yeah, they like certain times of that company's, history, decisions were able to be made quickly. Getting acquired by UPS, that makes decision-making process a little bit different. But it certainly allowed things to move quickly. And so I moved my desk like the next day. I did not have a comp plan. I didn't know what my salary was. I didn't have a title set up or anything like that. I just moved my desk over to a corner with one other person, and we just went through old bids and repriced them and started to try to win business. And that grew quickly into a huge part of the company. And so when I left Coyote, and I was originally thinking about going into software and getting out of logistics, during an interview process, I kept talking about freight. And the guy goes, well, you're talking about freight. And while we're in the industry to an extent, we're not a freight company.
Right.
Are you sure you want to do this? And I said, I guess not. And so then I reached out to my two co-founders, Jordan and Jesse, and said, I have this idea. I want to start this business. Original goal was to build a cross-border brokerage and sell it to somebody bigger, knowing that we could kind of incubate it, on our own outside of a company and build it and then sell a division to somebody. And pretty early on in the process that we realized that we needed tech to do that, and started building the technology, and we pivoted from being a brokerage to a tech company. And so we're still in a phase right now that's kind of a transitional phase, and we will be for the next couple of years. That goes from being this broker to a digital freight broker, digital freight marketplace to a managed digital marketplace or freight marketplace, all the way over to a truly autonomous, automated marketplace that we take our hands out of. And so as we go through kind of these phases of the business, we're kind of in phase, what I've been calling internally phase 1, but really phase 2, which is this digital freight brokerage, where we have our customers that are using our software, but our carriers aren't logged into the system yet. And so we'll be building out a carrier portal for later this year at some point that we'll release that allow carriers to log in and bid on freight. And at that point, I'll feel like we're at that phase where we're an actual marketplace, because two people can participate. But at the same time, our hands are still going to be in the middle of all of it, and we'll be blocking kind of the two sides. And so our goal long term is to be able to take our hands out of that and be the enablers that enable everybody to connect, and for a platform to generate that business for the customer and for the carrier, and have the execution happen automatically, so that we don't have to do it.
Cool. So can you talk, I mean, let's just talk all about pivots, right? So it is kind of an interesting pivot it's a big change in strategy, right? To essentially operating a cross-border brokerage. People have done that before, right? To turning it into a tech company. I guess that must have come with a lot of thought and a lot of conversation. Like what were the 2 or 3 things that you saw and how you were like, you know what we should do? We should completely change our strategy. What happened there?
I grew up with the ultimate freight, innovator, freight godfather, whatever they call my dad. Like he's always been changing the industry. When he started Coyote to build TMSs to sell to brokers, and pivoted into being a broker that became probably the greatest or one of the greatest brokerages in history. And he set a really different bar for the industry. And I don't know how long you've been in the industry or how other people look at this, but when Coyote started, C.H. Robinson was hands down the only big 3PL that anybody worked with for the most part. And that was where everybody went to. And because C.H. was so big, and they had acquired his last company in American Backhaulers too. So he understood how to
familiar with them. Yeah.
Yeah. And Backhaulers was innovative in its own mind. And that was really the first company that had software that allowed for matching loads and trucks. And it was very, very old technology, obviously. And things have evolved since then, but that was innovative in itself. What Coyote did in the industry was Coyote raised the level of service that's required of a broker and pushed prices down using blitz scaling, which is a Reid Hoffman methodology. And so the raising the bar for service, driving the cost down, transforming the way that C.H. Robinson provided service to their customers, because C.H. was getting phone calls from their customers every day, basically saying, hey, Coyote's offering us cheaper prices and better service. You have to be able to match that if you want to be successful. And so that caused CH to bring, their costs down and increase their service levels, which is hard to do with a giant company like that. And so
it's really hard.
He created that innovation right there. And there was kind of another piece to this whole kind of story that really ties into things, which was that while I was very early into, having left Coyote and exploring what I wanted to do next, I had been approached by several different brokers in Canada that wanted me to build out their US brokerage and also go into Mexico. And the thing that we kept getting stuck on was the model. I wanted to build technology and set up the sales and the carrier model in kind of a traditional, buy sell model or division of labor that you see at like a Coyote or a CH, rather than a cradle to grave model that you see at some smaller brokers. And these guys in Canada were on the cradle to grave model. And we had a lot of conversations around how to transform that. And there was a lot of, yeah, I think we can get the team to buy into that eventually, but we want to hire you. And they're offering me a lot of money and a good amount of equity. And I said, the only way that I'm going to be able to do this the way I want to do it is to do it, on my own and to raise money to do that. And so the reason why I'm more interested in technology than in building a brokerage is because I've already been part of a brokerage for the last 12 years.
Right.
It's been done over and over again. There's not a whole lot of reinventing being done with brokerages right now in the US. There's definitely innovation happening from the guys like Convoy and LoadSmart and Transfix, but that innovation is on the procurement side. It's on the internal operating side. It's not on the way that you do things. And so
it's a novel use of cell phones is really what it is, right? Yeah. I mean, you're not doing anything outside of what a typical. I mean, there's some rate guarantee stuff that they do and that they offer, right, which is a little bit nuanced. But I mean, I agree. But a lot of what you're doing is taking cell phones and more modern computer systems and trying to get capacity, right? There's nothing outside of that's really super novel. So I totally agree.
They're trying to Uberize trucking the same way Uber did that for taxis. But so what I'm getting at from my innovation mindset about things is when I think about amazing companies, I don't go, oh well, there's Coyote and CH and Echo. Like my thought process is Apple and Amazon and Facebook, and thinking about software companies and the way that they've changed the world. And I can't stop thinking about when Steve Jobs announced the iPod, and then and it was something that we had never thought about or knew that could exist and never really experienced before. And so that completely transformed the way that people look at things. I want, we're not going to invent the next iPhone or next cell phone, but I want the product that we create as a business to be innovative and new and easier for people to use than what they were used to using. And I know that the way to build that is by building a product-oriented business and a product company, a tech company, not a brokerage that has technology that supports the brokerage. And so as we expand and as we grow, we will start building other products on top of the core product that we're building right now.
How do you as a CEO kind of manage that, right? Because you're talking about your experiences in freight brokerage. It sounds like your blood's in freight brokerage, right? That's a lot of where probably heard a lot of conversations around the table about freight operations and freight brokerage operations. So how do you kind of think about transitioning from someone in that space to someone who's the CEO of a tech company, right? Like those are super different things.
It's heavily around the talents that I can build around myself. So I don't know how to code. I kind of wish I did learn when my dad told me when I was a teenager to learn how to code, and I didn't. Yeah. But we hired a president who comes from a software background. He started his own software company previously in Chicago. It's an ad tech, martech company that does identity management for marketing. We are in the process of bringing on somebody to run product. And the candidates that we've been interviewing do not have freight backgrounds. We're bringing in people with either marketplace or enterprise SaaS or kind of a combination of both of those in a role like that. Our CTO doesn't come from freight. Our director of engineering doesn't come from freight. So we're building out a team that's complementary in that we have some people with the freight experience and the tribal knowledge that's needed to be able to do this the right way, but we're complementing it with technical people and technologists that can take other things into this business. So like our new director of engineering came from Expedia.
Cool.
The people that we're talking to about this product roles, had experience at Amazon, for example. So stuff that's outside of this industry, I think is important to fill those roles rather than just plucking people from different brokerages and throwing them into a tech.
Right. Has there been anything interesting? I mean, that's some of the work that we do. So we have, developers, data scientists, engineers on staff, right? And when they come from different industries, sometimes they have really interesting, unique perspectives. I mean, sometimes it's a lot of fun to have those kind of teams where you have freight operations, heavy folks interact with the more technology folks. I mean, have you gotten any kind of cool insights or any, recommendations from those folks?
Somewhat. Some of the two people that I mentioned, the head of product and the director of engineering, are incoming right now, so they haven't been
Cool.
involved in the process yet. But
So really exciting time for you.
exactly. But our CTO has been very heavily involved in the design of the product and obviously the technology we're building, and he does not come from freight. So a lot of the ideas that have come into our system and the way that the process works,
The product and the process works. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't look like, this isn't like an updated version of Coyote's TMS. This isn't
Right.
a better version of Mercury Gate or McLeod. This is truly something very different that still helps do the same tasks that are involved with shipping,
Right.
but
Yeah.
the way that the process works is very different. So
In potentially the way that it's organized, right? I mean, I think that's when I look at some of the problems with current TMS platforms. I mean, I think the organization of the data and the process workflows like absolutely leave something to be to desire,
Yep.
right?
And then the other big change that we've seen is, hiring Mark as our president and effectively responsible for all revenue generation, sales, marketing, net revenue and all that stuff. He redesigned our entire sales structure. So our sales structure is very much from a SaaS model, not from the brokerage model, where like a lot of the time in the brokerage model, you have a sales rep that owns every single aspect of the relationship with the customer, whether it's giving them updates on a load or quoting or bidding on an actual RFP. We've taken all of that stuff and broken that apart separately to create more of a SaaS model and a machine for running through these processes and not having kind of that cradle to grave model. So that's actually been the biggest impact so far.
You bring up sales, which is obviously a super important, like difficult part for young companies, startups that are trying to grow, right? Like who's your ideal customer? Obviously folks that ship cross border, right? At the very least we have that, but could you kind of talk about, the types of organizations that you're trying to work with and kind of where you fit in?
Yeah, so we have our product breaks down into two core groups of customers. You've got obviously enterprise and middle market. Middle market is great for the portal that we launched back in October, and we're launching a new version of it in the next month or so. And that portal is still very much self-service, middle market, customer driven, versus working with one of the big CPG, or any Fortune 500 company who isn't going to be spending time outside of their own system and logging into ours. We'll build enterprise API integrations with them. And so the customer focus for us is anything, automotive in a normal scenario, obviously we want to keep growing. CPG, any of the big food and beverage companies, any of the big beer, tequila, packaging materials, produce obviously is a big thing that ships out of Mexico, and there's some produce out of Canada and a lot that goes into Canada. There's not much that isn't made at some point in Mexico or shipped to or from Canada. So if you look around your house, whether it's the TV or washers and dryers or fridges, every single part of all of those things at some point was made in Mexico or somewhere overseas. And so our customer base is really wide, from automotive, industrial, aerospace to CPG, food and bev, produce to medical and pharmaceutical, and kind of basically anything you could think of.
Sure. Again, kind of thinking about our own experience here as a small startup type of environment. I mean, think of in our sales conversations, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is, this is the current experience, right? This is how things currently work, and this is how they work with us, right? So I guess what would be that kind of Forager experience that if you were to talk to, a potential customer that you would want them to have, right? It sounds like it's a very much a tech forward product, a great customer service. Those are givens, but maybe from a more operational perspective, like what is the experience and what are the benefits if I'm coming to you with, some cross-border freight?
So the two things that every customer is looking for, and this is kind of every customer is looking for one of these two things. It's either better price or better service, or both of those things. Right. And so better price is self-explanatory. They want to save money because they're spending too much. Better service, though, can break down into a few things. It can be how their customer service rep handles them, or customer operations rep. how they work with them on a daily basis. It could be how they consume data and information from us or from their provider. So maybe they get an update once a day about whether or not a load picked up, and it's like 4 hours after the load picked up. Well, the obvious improvement would be to give them more updates regularly throughout the day, and better visibility into where their loads are and where the truck is for their load. And a lot of that is either done via phone call or email or spreadsheet, or they can log into Scout and they can see all that stuff right online. And so the service can break down into that piece. It can break down into a lack of data or information around how things work. There's a lot of confusion that goes into moving freight in and out of Mexico and Canada, and more so with the Mexico side of things. But there are all these different parties that are involved. And so customers feel like they've not been properly educated on how to operate a Mexico load. And so if we can have them kind of come out of their experience with us having felt smarter about how to operate Mexico freight, or felt like it's less of a problem for them now,
right.
That's the big, before and after for us. It's either saving money or it's a better experience, plus less time spent on handling it.
It's a burden reduction in some ways, right? So we don't even have to think about it. We know if we use these guys, it gets across. We know where it is. It's a clean process, and that's all right. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't mind, I think maybe we could just kind of cover current events a little bit, talk a little bit about COVID, and then I think I want to end on the exciting stuff. We can talk about the raise and kind of the go forward plan. So I think in terms of COVID, how have you kind of seen that? I mean, we talked about the volumes, right? So outside of volumes, has that changed your business at all? Changed your approach, your strategy? Has it, or is it just as simple as volumes aren't nearly as high as they were maybe 6 weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's had an impact on a few things. So I'll start with what you just talked about, which is the impact on our numbers, and that obviously has an impact on our model and our plan and our budget and everything else, because not generating as much revenue means not generating as much net revenue, which means not as much budget for hiring. And we've got this capital that we raised, 10 million, but that's meant to be spent on growth, not supporting sales reps that aren't paying for themselves. And so the impact that we've seen has obviously been on our budget, our runway, our company overall, for the health of like the financial side of things. We'll be fine. It's just it's going to make it for a rockier road over the next year and a half. The bigger impact that I've seen, though, is that it's really transformed our company. We've been very focused on, making sure that when people are in their remote settings. So like I'm married and I have a dog. And so I see my wife all the time, and my dog normally is sleeping like 3 feet away from me. We have people in similar situations. I have somebody that I hear screaming baby on the phone every day. I have someone that I hear like wife and daughter screaming at each other.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have people that are sitting at home by themselves, and we're trying to make sure that everybody is still feeling great about their day every single day, and that they come into work excited or come into work. So like some of the things that we've done is, we've given people, gift cards for like DoorDash or Grubhub or Uber Eats, so that they can get themselves food at least, once a week, I think. And that's an exchange for the fact that we were, catering meals a couple times a week. And so now we don't have to pay for the meals that we were catering once a week, or once or twice a week. We don't have to pay for the supplies in the office. And so there's a trade-off there, in that we didn't have an expense there anymore. So we allocated some of that to the people directly. The other thing that we did with the initial group of people is that everybody that's in kind of their work from home mode situation right now, there's something that's not working well for them, whether it's their chair, whether it's their headphones. Everyone brought monitors home. So they've got a setup. Somebody's desk broke last week, one of our engineers. So we basically said, for everybody that's here, we bought each of them one thing to make their day better, whether it was a pair of headphones, whether it was a new desk, whether it was a chair, a coffee machine. We had a coffee machine and a cold brew tap in the office. So like, we don't have that now, which like is affecting me a lot, I guess. The lack of cold brew has been a negative impact on my day.
It's been a serious crash around 2 every day, right?
Yeah, but we've been very mindful of like our people, and of making sure that they feel great about what they're doing, and that they're still excited and engaged. And we use Zoom and Slack a lot. So we're doing a lot of video calls, but I don't feel like we've lost any productivity from it.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think from our perspective, and again, I just kind of keep going back, but I think in some ways this has given us a sense of purpose, right? We're pretty heavy in food and bev if you look at our client mix. So there's a real sense of like purpose and mission, all of a sudden delivering flour into grocery stores seems like it has like an order of magnitude 100 times higher than it was, maybe 2 months ago. Right. I thought just in some ways, I think this has been a good way for folks in the transportation and freight industry to really, connect the value of the work that they do on a daily basis. Right. I've definitely noticed that.
I had that realization several years ago at Coyote when there was a hurricane in the Northeast, and I was the one that was awake at 2 o'clock in the morning calling owner operators in Maryland. I was in San Diego, so 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Calling owner operators in the Northeast, trying to get them to go pick up disaster relief freight and deliver it to literally drive into the storm and go help people.
Right.
I fortunately got that sense, that point. A lot of what we do is not kind of life-saving product right now. It's more so manufacturing, but the food side obviously has an impact on that. But I'm guessing you guys have gotten a better sense of that than we have.
Yeah, a lot of food and beverage. The alcohol distribution company that we work with has been sky high. Volumes are up, so it's good. It's been good. What about so we've been doing like roundtables, classrooms. So for clients, for prospects, just kind of talking about, because the market dynamics change, right? And I think it's slowed down a little bit now, but it's still good, for us to communicate to these folks. But one question that we've got a lot on these roundtables from prospects, and some of them are clients, prospects, other people in our network, is around kind of delay times and process at the borders. We must have gotten that 3 or 4 different weeks. Is that something that you've seen impacted at all where you are doing that tracking?
So the impact of the delay is going to be because customs agents are also getting coronavirus. The biggest impact I've ever seen with delays was when Trump tried to close the border and took all of the customs agents that were inspecting product and had them inspecting people instead. And so the amount of time it took to clear freight, at least at the southern border, I think it's a little bit easier at the northern border, but the amount of time it took for freight to clear like doubled or tripled. And so instead of, somebody maybe sitting in like Nuevo Laredo waiting to cross into the US for like an hour, they could have been spending anywhere from 3 to 12 hours waiting to cross. So that was a really drastic impact. I don't know what the actual number or impact is on the staffing for customs this time around, because to that point, like they have closed the border for non-essential travel. And so non-essential travel being people like foot and like car traffic, not like traffic. And so freight's continuing to move. I can't imagine it's having a huge impact. I think the biggest impact typically on why freight takes a long time across the border is bad information or bad data or bad process around it. That's what we're working to solve.
Gotcha.
Moving all that data out of emails and into a system.
Are you thinking about that, like connecting with ERPs potentially? So where are you going to, okay, interesting.
Yeah, integrating with customs brokerage systems, just giving better data and access to the data that is involved in a load crossing.
Right. Even if you can create a, go ahead.
I was just saying there's always a reason something doesn't cross. It's not like it didn't cross because it just didn't cross. It's more so related to the fact that there wasn't the right transfer of data from one person to another, or there was a wrong SCAC code that was associated with it.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're able to manage a couple of different systems and integrate effectively, I mean, there's a ton of value in accurate data that comes out of that, right? I mean, that's got to be a big part of what, kind of what you guys are working on.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. So I think the last thing that we'll kind of talk about here would be the recent round. So I think about 4 weeks ago, something like that, you guys announced a Series A. Do you want to kind of talk about that? Maybe talk about the process and kind of what you're thinking about. You spoke about it a little bit in terms of forward-looking growth, but you could just expand on kind of what you're thinking about. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so we started, we've raised a total of $14.5 million to date across the pre-seed, seed, and Series A now. We've been able to accumulate a good investor base. Going back to the first round, TFI International led that round. TFI owned, probably half the assets that are in Canada, and they also own CFI and Transport America in the U.S. And so they have a really large footprint as a transportation company, and that made for a really great kind of jumping off point for us. We also brought on investors in Laredo that own customs brokers and trucking companies, and also a distribution company out west. And so that was kind of the initial part. Chicago Ventures came on as our lead investor for the seed round, and joined, one of their partners joined our board. And then the Series A US Venture Partners, who has invested previously with Chicago Ventures, they led our Series A on a $10 million round. And we went through it's a long process to raise money, and especially the more money you're raising, the longer the process and the more tedious it is. So we had started having, very light kind of get to know you conversations back in December of last year. And as like things kind of started to progress and we started to get, levels of interest from people, we started to kind of sort through, who made sense to focus on and who didn't. And there were people on every kind of end of the spectrum, from like knowing exactly what we do and why we exist to wondering how we're different from ShipBob and Four Kites and Project 44. And we're not any of those.
Not even slightly remotely close to what.
But I got that question multiple times. And so it was interesting because a lot of the conversations were around educating people on what we do. And they're also, and some of this is my fault, like we didn't have the best like pitch deck that really clearly illustrated what we're building long term. And so it was an interesting process to meet all these investors out both in San Francisco and New York. We boiled it down to a few that we really liked and ultimately made the decision on the one that we wanted to move forward with. The cool thing about USVP is that they do two kind of core kind of lanes that they focus on. One is in technology or IT, and then the other is medical or healthcare. And so the group that was focused on anything related to technology, they've just been super engaging from the beginning. And so very engaging, very excited about what we're doing. They invested in Happy Returns before, which is kind of a logistics oriented company. They've done, they did Trunk Club, which obviously had a lot of their own supply chain issues. So they've seen kind of what happened before and why we could solve a problem. And it ultimately came down to, explaining what we're building, what my vision is for the business, how much money we needed to be able to get there, how much we needed right now, and what we're investing it in. And so we ended up raising 10. We had gone in thinking somewhere between 8 and 10, and so we landed at that 10 number, which is great. Our core part of what we're investing in is the technology, the product, and sales. And so, which is kind of most of any business.
Yeah, good.
Building out the engineering team, it's doubling or tripling that engineering team so that we can write code faster and build more product. It's building out the product team. It's getting that product at any given time as a business. And I'd still been doing a lot of sales. And so we wanted to shift that to actually having a truly structured sales engine that would really get these things going at a high level. And so that's where our investment is going right now. And for the next year and a half, we've got a few major milestones that we want to achieve. Two of the big milestones, one is fully automating a load matching and getting booked and tracked through our system without anybody at Forager doing that. And then the other is, this is kind of in the reverse order, but the other is releasing a carrier portal that allows carriers to log in and bid on freight and book loads and provide pricing. So those two things tie together nicely, but that gets us on the nice path to be able to being kind of what we're envisioning as a business.
Awesome. That's exciting stuff. Well, that's really all I had today, if that works for you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. It was great to talk to you, and love learning a little bit more about what you guys are doing too.
And that's our show. Have questions for Matt about cross-border shipping or anything within logistics in Canada? Leave a comment on our video and we'll be sure to make sure Matt sees it. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.